All right, let's take one step into a series of examples where the default treatment of level of detail in Tableau fails. There are quite a few of these. In fact, when I started doing this particular series of examples, the very first business question I asked myself, the normal level of detail failed. And so it is not like it's an esoteric, seldom encountered problem. This really does happen quite a bit. And so we need to know kind of what to do in these cases. In this particular video, we're going to recreate some functionality that Tableau already has. I know that may sound ridiculous, but one of the important things with these level of detail expressions that we're going to be developing is that they can be really tricky to get right, like really, really tricky. And so in my experience, it's often better to recreate an example where you can verify that the answer is correct. And just to make sure that you're understanding the concepts, right? Just to make sure that, oh, right, that's how it works. I know I got this right. Because if you don't have some kind of ground truth, if you don't know for sure what the answer is going to be, how do you know that you wrote this complicated level of detail expression, or really any other expression in coding or Tableau or whatever? How do you know you got it right? So let's just do something where the answer is already known, just to get our feet under us. That question is going to be what percentage of sales did each author's book account for? So let's say you have author Thompson, for instance. Author Thompson has books A, B, C. Was it 30% of the sales were for book A, 30% of the book sales were for B, and 30% of the books, or 40% of the book sales were for C? Or was it 20, 20, 60? Or was it 10, 10, 80? Like, what did that breakdown look like? Where are an author's sales coming from in terms of their books? So let's give that a shot. Let's make a new sheet. And to get those in there, to get those ideas in there, first of all, if we're thinking like sales across author, we need the author, so let's do last name. And if we're thinking about sales across their book, let's do the book title. So these are the fundamental pieces. And then next we need the sales. So let's do just the count of the sales. And again, when you drag the count of the sales in, because sales is a number, it's going to assume that this is continuous. If you want it in more table form, which is going to help a lot in this particular example, go ahead and click the little arrow associated with count of sales and change it from continuous to discrete. Okay, so once we're here, you can see, for instance, this 439 says that Barnhart sold 439 copies of Banana Slug and the Lost Boys. Or what was it, Lost Cow, sorry, I was thinking Peter Pan. Or 491 copies of Banana Slug and the Zero Friends, or so on and so on and so on. So more on that later. That's not quite exactly the precise interpretation. This is actually the number of sales involving this book, but we'll get more into that in the future. So what do we do with this now? Well, if we want to know what percentage this represents, we need to divide each one of these by the sum. This is where the problem comes in. So notice if I take out this title level of detail, the level of detail of this visualization is now at the author level, at the last name level. And what this is saying is that Barnhart wrote 930 total, or sold, 930 total books. If I put that level of detail back in, I can see that 439 of them came from the Lost Cow version, and 491 of them came from the Zero and Friends version. So the question is, how do we actually combine these levels? This is the problem, is that we have information we want to use that is at two different levels of detail, and the way Tableau works by default is the only level of detail that's going to be easily displayed on this visualization is the level of detail of the view. So if you're displaying last name and that's your level of view, the sum is going to be done there, or the count is going to be done there. If you're displaying title, that's a more granular level of view, and the count is going to be done there. But we want both. So how do we actually do this? We need to do something different. So we need to make a calculated field that fixes the level of detail in the visualization. So let's go up here, and this little arrow right here, we can say create calculated field. I know it's slightly off screen for you, but it's the first one. And let's call this count fixed by author. Okay, that's going to be the name of our variable. Level of detail expressions in Tableau are enclosed in curly braces, and there are three types. There's an include type, exclude type, and a fixed type. So for today, or for this video rather, we're only going to be dealing with the fixed type. So we say fixed. Notice it turns blue because it's a reserved keyword, and we have to tell it what level of detail we want to fix our calculation at. So in this particular case, if I'm looking for the total number of books sold by an author, I want to fix the level of detail at the author. So I can actually say, in this case, last name, and then a colon, and then what I want to do, the calculation I want to perform. So I want to fix at the last name, and I want to count sales. Okay, so I basically want to do exactly what I'm doing here, except that here by default in Tableau, I'm using the level of detail associated with the view, which here is title. This command is saying, no, don't use the level of view in the actually contained in the visualization. I'm telling you to fix the level of view at last name and then compute the count of sales. So let's run this command. Notice we get a new field in our author data sheet, and that's because we're fixing at the author level of detail, so that kind of belongs to author data sheet. We can drag this in. Again, it's a number, so Tableau thinks it's continuous by default. We're going to change this to discrete. And if we pull this over, I just want to do this to make it make sense. So notice here, this 930 for Barnhart is 439 plus 491. That is where this is coming from. That's exactly where this is coming from. Or, I mean, in some cases it's really easy. In other cases it's much harder. Like I could not look at these numbers here and say that they summed to 8,037. It's just not something I could do in my head. So what do we do with this now? Well, if I want to turn this into a percent, I need to make a new calculated field. And so we can say create calculated field, and we can say percent of total sales. And what do I want this to be? I can actually define it in terms of the other fields. So I want this to be the count of sales divided by the count fixed by author. And notice I'm getting an error here. What this is saying is that you can't mix aggregate and non-aggregate levels of detail. And so just put this inside a sum. It doesn't particularly matter because it's going to be broken down well in this particular case. You just need to aggregate it one way or the other. So if I hit OK here, what I now have is a new variable that does not belong to any data sheet. Notice it's down here all the way at the bottom. All the way at the bottom here. And the reason for that is it's operating across data sheets. I fixed one level of detail here, but I fixed a different level of detail here, and so this is a problem. So how do we actually deal with this? We drag it up, we turn it to discrete, and notice what's happened now. I've turned these into percent. So for instance, this 439 we now know is about 47% of the total, or this 491 is about 53% of the total. And again, you could mess with the formatting here if you wanted to, like click this, do this, and change this. You know, you could try to, like for instance, let's turn it into a percentage, and we can go from the decimal format to the percentage format. So hopefully this is making sense. Let me just review real quick before we do the other version. So here's the idea. We have a calculation that depends on several levels of detail. One that's taking place in the visualization, that's this count here, and that's happening here because of the level of detail we've specified in the view, in the visualization itself. We have another thing that we want to compute that operates at a different level of detail, namely in this case just at the author. We don't care about the title because we want to sum over all the possible titles. In order to fix this idea, in order to fix this level of detail, we actually have to write what's called a level of detail expression, and that just says, I know there's something going on in the view, I don't care. What I'm telling you is to fix the level of detail at the level of last name, and at that level compute the count of sales. So that means ignore title, ignore ISBN, ignore format, just ignore everything. Stop at the name and do the count there. And then once we have that, we could, for instance, divide the count that we're seeing here, divided by the, take that divided by the total count in order to get a percentage. All right. So why is this kind of a silly example? Because we can do this just by hand, so or with Tableau rather. So we can actually just drag in count of sales again, turn it from continuous to discrete, and here, instead of just doing the count, if I click this triangle again, I say quick table calculation, percentage of total, and notice I'm getting a null. That's not what I mean. There's something strange going on there. But let's say compute using. And now this means like percentage of what total? Do you want the total to be across the table going down? Do you want the total to be across the table going this way, side to side, or do you want it to be across part of the table? So for instance, do you want it to be just over title or just over last name? So the way I think of this is like if I select title, for instance, these are the percentages across like all the titles that are going to sum to 100%. So let me show you what I mean by that. So notice in this particular case, I get exactly the same answer up to rounding. And again, this is just a formatting issue. If I format, and instead of numbers, I say percentage, they're actually identical in this case. So I just switched the format so that the rounding was the same. But notice what I said here, just to remind us. I said compute using title, and what that says is all the titles should sum to 100%. So if I have an author and then a title, all of these titles, the percentages should sum to 100. That's the total that I'm talking, the percentage of the total across all the titles. So the point being that level of details can be a little tricky, and you have to think carefully about them. And because of that, Tableau has built-in functionality to do most of these things for us. Now, that being said, there are many, many cases yet to come in which Tableau's default functionality won't work. The only point here was to show you a case where we could write the level of detail expression ourselves and verify it against a known outcome, namely the one that Tableau supports for us. But in the future, we won't have that kind of ground truth. So we need to gain our confidence now, and so we can push forward in the future.